Good morning, class. What usually happens, I want to know whether you are able to hear me loud and clear. Is there any impedance or any breakup in the voice? Please let me know. And I hope you can see the slides. So, are you able to listen to me loud and clear? Is there any voice break or something? So, today's class is pulmonary hypertension. Uh, it's a very important class, it's a very important topic. It's not that difficult a topic, and you must have come across this term pulmonary hypertension. So we'll quickly start off with the class. So pulmonary hypertension. First, what is pulmonary hypertension? We'll talk about the pulmonary circulation. As you all know, it's a vascular system where blood from the right side of the heart goes to the lungs, get properly oxygenated. There's a gas exchange taking place, and then it goes back to the left side of the heart. Pulmonary arteries, they are thin walled and distensible, and they're responsible for taking the blood from the right ventricle to the lungs, and the pulmonary veins are responsible for uh, carrying over the blood from lungs to the left side of the heart. And in the due process, there is something called pulmonary vascular resistance, which is a measure of impedance to the flow in the pulmonary vasculature. And this pulmonary vascular resistance is very important because it comes under the definition of pulmonary hypertension. And what is important to know that it depends on the pulmonary artery pressure, left atrial pressure, and the cardiac output. So the pulmonary vascular resistance depends on all the three factors like pulmonary artery pressure, left atrial pressure, and the cardiac output. So if there is any impairment in any one of these three factors, it's gonna be reflected on the pulmonary vascular resistance. Then you have something normal pulmonary artery pressure is something called 25 by 8 millimeter mercury, or the mean pulmonary artery pressure is around about 14 and 15 plus minus 3, that is for standard deviation. So you can see this photograph, and you can really make out how you can see from the systemic artery there's the left ventricle, and this is the vein, and the blood goes into the right atrium from right ventricle to the pulmonary circulation, and this is the pulmonary artery, and then from pulmonary circulation through the pulmonary veins it goes to the left atrium, and then from the left ventricle to the systemic arteries. So you can see this diagram, and now carrying on with our session on pulmonary hypertension. It's in a very loose term, it is something, pulmonary hypertension is an abnormal elevation in pulmonary artery pressure, and it's definitely a feature of advanced disease. And as the pulmonary artery pressure and the pulmonary vascular resistance progresses, it would lead to right heart failure and death, because as this thing will increase, the pressure in the pulmonary artery or the pulmonary vasculature increases, it's gonna create something called afterload on the right ventricle, and right ventricle, as you all know, has a very limited capacity to tolerate any kind of afterload, because it's a thin walled and it's not very muscular. So the consequence effect is that with the ongoing increase in pulmonary artery pressure and with the marked load on the right ventricles, it might lead to the collapse of the right ventricle and dysfunction of the right ventricle, and that will invariably lead to right heart failure. So the one important thing is recently there has been not many advancement not only in understanding the pathogenesis in pulmonary hypertension, as well as the in the novel treatment modalities and specific treatment modalities which are available for pulmonary hypertension depending upon the cause. Because one thing very important to note it down in pulmonary hypertension, early diagnosis, early initiation of pharmacotherapy, and this all will lead to survival advantage for the patient. Definition wise, pulmonary hypertension is a hemodynamic and pathophysiological condition which is defined as mean pulmonary artery pressure. Mind that it's a mean pulmonary artery pressure more than 25 millimeter mercury at rest, and that is being assessed through right heart catheterization. And in a way it is a pulmonary arterial hypertension. It is something, a clinical condition. So we were talking about pulmonary arterial hypertension is a clinical condition, and pulmonary hypertension is more of a theoretical condition where you have the assessment through the measurements of mean pulmonary artery pressure through right heart catheterization. But the pulmonary arterial hypertension is a clinical condition. It's characterized by presence of precapillary pH in absence of other causes of precapillary pH, such as pulmonary hypertension due to lung disease or chronic thromboembolic disease or other rare diseases. So coming on to the groups of pulmonary hypertension, you will have the pulmonary hypertension has been of lately divided into many groups with the advancement in the recent modalities of treatment which has been very cause specific. So we have divided pulmonary hypertension into 5 groups. First group is where it is also called idiopathic pulmonary arterial hypertension, where you will have elevation of PAP, that is pulmonary artery pressure, but with a normal pulmonary capillary wedge pressure. Normally it is less than, the pulmonary capillary wedge pressure is less than 15, and the elevation in PAP is more than 25. And there's again in such idiopathic pulmonary hypertension, in this group you will find a pulmonary vascular resistance more than 3 Woods. So these all 3 are the things which you have to note down. And the causes of idiopathic pulmonary arterial hypertension, you have hereditaries, that is through certain molecular and genetic level, and then you have exposure to certain drugs and toxins. Then those which are associated with newborns, with congenital heart diseases, those which are associated with connective tissue disorders like very commonly scleroderma, which is very common association in scleroderma. Then you have collagen vascular disease, or then you can have a non-liver cause for portal hypertension that can also cause primary pulmonary. This is also called primary pulmonary arterial hypertension. Then in patient with HIV infection and in patient with schistosomiasis, this is one of the parasitic infections which can also cause increase in pulmonary arterial hypertension. Then in chronic hemolytic anemias, like in sickle cell anemias. So they all are branded under group 1 pulmonary arterial hypertension or idiopathic pulmonary hypertension. Then you have group 2 cases where basically, just a minute. In group 2 are basically all the causes of left heart failure. Every causes, all the causes of left heart failure invariably going on to increase in pulmonary venous pressure. As you can see the diagram, with the increase in or decrease in cardiac output, or with the left heart failure, it will invariably going to increase the pulmonary venous pressure, and this pulmonary venous pressure, as a result, it will lead to increase in pulmonary artery pressure. So any elevation in pulmonary artery pressure with elevation along with the elevation in pulmonary capillary wedge pressure, that is what happens when there is a pulmonary venous hypertension because of the left heart failure. And it can be systolic dysfunction, systolic left heart dysfunction, or diastolic dysfunction, where you have preserved ejection fraction, or even in patient with valvular heart diseases. It can be aortic stenosis or mitral stenosis. So these are the group which is most common. Most of 50% of the cases fall in this group. Patients with left heart failure go, and they invariably going in for pulmonary arterial hypertension. Then group 3. Group 3 is any pulmonary hypertension which is associated with hypoxic lung diseases. In hypoxic lung diseases, because of the ongoing hypoxemia, there will be again increase in peripheral vascular resistance. With increase because of the hypoxia, there will be vasoconstriction in the pulmonary vasculature, and that will invariably increase the pulmonary peripheral resistance, and that will invariably go on to increase the pulmonary artery pressure. And it's a long process, and so the chronic hypoxia with mild elevation of PAP, and the causes will be, as you all know, interstitial lung disease is one of the very common causes. Then you have COPD, chronic obstructive lung disease. Then sleep disordered breathing, even the alveolar hyperventilation disorder, or patients living in high altitude with chronic exposure to high altitude, or any developmental abnormalities of the pulmonary vasculature. So these all will lead to chronic hypoxia, and that will really lead to mild elevation of pulmonary artery pressure. So this is a group 3 diseases. Group 4 you have due to chronic thromboembolic disease, and this group has been of lately been separated, and it used to be clubbed under group 1, but of lately it has been separated because the treatment modality has it has a very because as I told you, with the novel drugs, we have some introduction of so many novel drugs. So this has been grouped under a separate topic, and because the diagnosis of specific type of pulmonary hypertension is very important nowadays, because of advance in recent therapeutic approaches. So we would like to so that's why this group has evolved over, and it has very good prognosis, and it is very well treatable. That's why it's a very important group, that is pulmonary hypertension due to chronic thromboembolic diseases, that is elevation of pulmonary artery pressure with documentation of any pulmonary arterial obstruction for more than 3 months, as happens in chronic pulmonary thromboembolism. Then the group 5 is one with unclear or multifactorial mechanism, and it can be in association with the systemic disease like sarcoidosis, or the actual relationship is not very certainly understood. Then you have hematological disorders like myeloproliferative or splenectomy. Then you have systemic disorders like sarcoidosis or pulmonary Langerhans cells, neurofibromatosis, vasculitis. Then very important, one of the very important causes is thyroid disorders you have. And so these are the group with miscellaneous causes. So when you uh, come across a patient of pulmonary hypertension, definitely they will have a clinical symptom of abnormal dyspnea on rest, or maybe abnormal exertional dyspnea. And what are the risk factors? As you can see, all these are the several risk factors as depend on the cause, then susceptibility of the genes, that is a molecular susceptibility, then vascular injury, which usually undergoes when you have, as you can see, the pulmonary vasculature, intima, media, adventitia, and there will be, as the pressure increases, as there will be decreased release of nitric oxide synthase, decreased prostacyclin. Nitric oxide is responsible for the vasodilation, and then prostacyclin, it helps in inhibiting platelet aggregations, and it has an anti-inflammatory effects. So when there is a decrease in prostacyclin and then increase in thromboxans and increase in endothelin 1 production, so these all will go on to cause vascular smooth muscle dysfunction, hyperproliferation, hyperplasia of all the individual layers. As you see, the smooth muscle hypertrophy and the intimal proliferation will take place, and there will be subsequent clot or resistance to the vascular flow. We can have an in situ thrombosis, or we can have still have adventitia, intimal proliferation, and smooth muscle hypertrophy. So this is how the disease progresses. And again, we're looking back to the mechanism, as I said, of pulmonary vasoconstriction, which is widespread and maybe due to hypoxia, then vascular obstruction as the in situ thrombosis, or any emboli, or any stenosis, even pulmonary stenosis, as it's been mentioned here. Then increase in blood flow, as happens in the left to right intercardiac shunt, AST and VSTs. That will again going to increase of blood flow through the pulmonary arteries. Then any loss of pulmonary vascular bed, as as compromised by the parenchymal lung diseases, or through scarring or destructive process affecting the alveolar walls. So these are the four main mechanisms of development of pulmonary hypertension. Again, group-wise pathophysiology. Group 1 pathophysiology, as you can see, there will be increase in PVR, and group 1 will related to vasoconstriction, proliferative and obstructive remodeling of the pulmonary vessels, and subsequent inflammation and thrombosis. And then there will be abnormal expression of potassium channel in the smooth muscles and endothelial dysfunction. And the group 2, as you saw, there's a passive backward transmission of the pulmonary venous pressure, and that's leading to elevation of PVR, which is again due to increase in vasomotor tones and fixed structure obstructive abnormalities. Then hypoxia is the main stimulus in group 3, as we saw. And in group 4, any acute emboli or in situ thrombus that undergoing fibrosis, and that might lead to mechanical obstruction to the pulmonary arteries. And in group 5, it's a multifactorial mechanisms. So definition wise, again, I'm trying to stress on this point. pH is characterized by presence of precapillary pulmonary hypertension in the absence of other causes of precapillary hypertension. This is a basically definition for idiopathic pulmonary arterial hypertension, where you will have mean pulmonary arterial pressure greater than 25, pulmonary capillary wedge pressure less than 15, and PVR pulmonary vascular resistance more than 3 Woods, or that's not shown in this slide. Then on a molecular level, as I said, there's prostacyclin, which is again a potent vasodilator, inhibits platelets and has anti-proliferative properties. So this is decrease in the pulmonary arteries in PAH. Then endothelin 1 is a potent vasoconstrictor and stimulates again the smooth muscle proliferations. And so the plasma levels of endothelin 1 are increased in PAH and clearance is reduced, which is important from therapeutic point of view. Then nitric oxide is again a vasodilator and inhibition of platelet activation and vascular muscle cell proliferation. And so once formed, the effect of nitric oxide is largely mediated by something GMP pathway, which is rapidly inactivated by phosphodiesterase inhibitors, especially the PDE5 isoenzymes. As you can will see in the therapeutic modalities, this is a very important mechanism. Then there are serotonin. It's a vasoconstrictor and it promotes again the muscle hypertrophy and hyperplasia. So there's certain variation in serotonin transport are present in PH. Then something called vasoactive intestinal peptide, and it is something similar to prostacyclin. And serum and lung tissue VIPs are decreased in PH patients. On the genetic level, it has been found out that this very common is this bone morphogenetic protein receptors, and this belongs to the tissue growth TGF-B superfamily, which is involved in vascular cell proliferation, and mutation are detected in at least 70% of cases of PAH. Then there is something called activin receptor like kinase or integrin that have been identified in PH. So idiopathic PH is something a sporadic disease without any familial history of PH or non-triggering factor, and formerly it was called primary pulmonary hypertension, and very importantly it is supposed to be disease of the young females. So coming on to the signs and symptoms of pulmonary arterial hypertension, as you can make out, easy fatigability and letharginess, any exertional chest pain or any exertional breathlessness, and that breathlessness may be out of proportion to the concomitant or comorbid disease the patient is suffering from. Because the other one is syncope and pre-syncope with exertion. This is one of the symptoms which has lately been it has been inducted in the guidelines, severity grading. So syncope and pre-syncope is another one of very important subjective finding. Then cough, hemoptysis, hoarseness of voice may be invariably be present. And while examination signs, because of the cardiac affection, the pulmonary hypertension, you will have accentuation of P2, that is the pulmonic component of the second heart sound, because of the earlier or more forceful valve closure attributing to high pressure in the pulmonary arteries. Then murmurs of tricuspid insufficiency are commonly heard, which is really a hollow system murmur, and you might have a pulmonary insufficiency murmur that is called a Graham-Still murmur in the second intercostal space. Then you will have a left parasternal heave because of the right ventricular hypertrophy, and as the right atrium contracts and empties contents into poorly compliant hypertrophic right ventricle, there might be a presystolic gallop or S4, S3 originating from the right ventricle, and jugular venous pressure it will invariably be distended due to the right heart failure, and that can lead to peripheral edema with especially the lower limb edemas. And for the classification of the this is a WHO classification of functional status of the patient with PH. It's where class 1 is a patient with PH in whom there is a usually no limitation of usual physical activity. That is, the ordinary physical activity does not cause any increase or dyspnea, fatigue, chest pain, or pre-syncope. Then the class 2 is the patient with PH who have mild limitation of physical activity. There is no discomfort at rest, but normal physical activity causes increased dyspnea, fatigue, chest pain, or pre-syncope. Then patient with PH class 3 who have marked limitation of physical activity, and there is usually no discomfort at rest, but less than ordinary activity causes dyspnea, fatigue, chest pain, or pre-syncope. And then patient for grade class 4 is a patient who are unable to perform any physical activity, and they're breathless at rest, and they might have a signs of right ventricular failure, and symptoms basically increase by any even minimal subtle activities. Uh, Irrespective of all the modern advancement, irrespective of novel therapies, uh, we still the usually the survival period, as you can see, is median survival period is 2.8 years. So that's why this is a very important disease which has to be addressed at the very early course, and initiation of the therapy should be started at the very early course. So as the median survival, you can see 2.8 years with 1, 3, and 5 years survival, 68, 48, and 50, 34% respectively. And irrespective of all the diagnostic modalities and therapeutic modalities, the most importantly, the patient with PH, they are diagnosed. Usually, the diagnosis from the onset, it can be delayed up to 2 years on an average level. So, once it has achieved enormous proportion, so the diagnosis is made usually at a very later phase of the disease, and that's why the prognosis and the survival rate goes down. So irrespective of uh, advancement in the recent diagnostic modalities, we are still there's a lot of work to be done and lot of awareness to be advocated and disseminated as far as diagnosis of PH is concerned. Then functional class remains a very strong predictor of survival. Definitely, you have to see, you have to assess patient's symptom and symptomatology, and his functional status and his way of life, because making a diagnosis on the basis of invasive procedure is not always pragmatic, especially in the old patients. And so a certain prognosis of patient with PH associated scleroderma is worse than that for idiopathic pulmonary artery hypertension. And then you have congenital heart disease have a better prognosis than those with IPH. Then cause of death is usually right ventricular failure, which is manifested by progressive hypoxemia, and that hypoxemia leading to hypotension with decrease in cardiac output. That invariably leads to tachycardia, and with the back pressure, it will lead to peripheral edema. So these are the parameters of the worst prognosis in PH: presence of right ventricle failures, any rapid progression of symptoms, any history of syncope, or any WHA functional classification grade 4. And this is a 6-minute walk test, which is any 6-minute walk test less than 300 meters. It is again a subjective finding, but it is very important in assessing the functional capacity of the PH patient. and it is very easy to perform. So it is one of the important parameters to be considered. Then any pericardial effusion, that again leads to, that denotes worse prognosis. Diagnostic tests, most importantly and most widely and effectively used is echocardiography. What is important is it can be very conveniently performed. It is a very uh, easy, convenient, and not very expensive, and it can be performed in a short span of time, and there is invariably no preparation needed for this test to be performed. It has sensitivity of 55% and specificity of 70% in detecting significant pH. And what actually the echocardiography, there are so many findings, like you will have first we're talking about ECG. Sorry, we're talking about ECG first. ECG has a sensitivity of 55% and specificity of 70%. On ECG, you will have a right ventricular hypertrophy or strain pattern, and that is being shown on the ECG, the right ventricular strain pattern uh, by seeing. It is shown on the ECG by right axis deviation on the ECG, or by the increase in the width of the atrial, that's width of the atrial wave on ECG. Then P pulmonale due to right atrial enlargement can be present, or ventricular arrhythmias are rare, and SVT may be present on ECG. As you can see that ECG, this is the right axis deviation, and increased P wave. This is the increased P wave, especially in the lead 2. You can see the increased P wave. But ECG finding is very non-specific. Never go by ECG findings. Chest radiography, it depends on the cause. Like idiopathic pulmonary arterial hypertension will have a chest radiograph is one of the convenient screening tests, where you will find central pulmonary artery dilatation, which contrasts with pruning of the peripheral blood vessels with oligemic peripheral lung fields, and you might find right atrial, right ventricular enlargement. These are things you have to remember. This is the pulmonary artery dilatation of the central pulmonary arteries, and with the accentuation of the peripheral vessels, and you will have areas of oligemia. And then you can have this right ventricular enlargement can be seen. This is what I was talking about, echocardiography. This is one of the most convenient and the most important screening test, and most usually more than half of the cases come to the clinical or diagnosis of pulmonary hypertension based on echocardiography. And the patients of pulmonary hypertension, they come to our notice simply on echocardiography for certain other causes. If we're doing an echocardiography for the physician doing echo for the valvular disease, or for the systolic or diastolic left heart failure, they invariably this is one of the you can say a surreptitious finding when the echo is performed on such patients. So it is very easy to perform, and it is very important. It can estimate pulmonary artery systolic pressure, and that invariably can be extrapolated and onto the mean pulmonary artery pressure, and it can assess the right ventricular size, thickness, and function, and even the in addition to the left ventricular systolic and diastolic function, valve structural valve morphology, any pericardial effusion or intracardiac shunt. So there's definitely a plethora of findings on echocardiography, like signs of because of the load on the right ventricle. There will be right ventricular hypertrophy and right atrial hypertrophy. Maybe the paradoxical bulging of the septum into the right ventricular septum to the left ventricle during systole. And again, the right ventricle fails. There might be dilatation and hypokinesia of the right ventricle, septal flattening, and invariably right atrial dilatation. And one important finding is tricuspid regurgitation, which is invariably present in such cases. and these are certain PAP systolic pressure, how it's calculated. It is, I think it is uh, beyond the scope of your knowledge right now. We'll skip this. Then this is the this is the film you get on echocardiography. As you can see, you will have a massively dilated right ventricle. This is right ventricle, this is left ventricle, this is left atria, this is right atria, and this is the maximally dilated right ventricle. And again, you can see the right atria is also dilated, and this is the right ventricle septum, which has this bulging of septum into the left ventricle, and the left ventricle and left atrium has narrowed up. This is how it is. This is a graphic uh, presentation where you can see the pictorial presentation. You can see left ventricle, left atria, right ventricle, and this is tricuspid regurgitation, and this is TR jet and PA flow. So it's beyond the scope of this class right now. And then something called pulmonary angiography to detect the visualize the clots in the pulmonary vasculature. Then pulmonary function test is a very important test, is to assess the underlying any there's ILDs or lung disease leading to PH, or any obstructive pattern suggestive of COPD, and even the decrease in carbon dioxide carrying capacity of the lung, which says a lot about thromboembolism. Then you have a serology test, and I said HIV is one of the very important associated idiopathic pulmonary hypertension, where you have HIV patients with in HIV patient associated PH. So HIV serology is very important, and liver function test is again very important to screen for portopulmonary hypertension that can happen in chronic liver diseases. Then anti-nuclear antibodies for the connective tissue disorders. Then thyroid function test. This anti-pro-BNP is a precursor of this brain natriuretic peptide, which is significant for the right heart failure or left heart systolic or diastolic failure. This is one of the marker which is pragmatically very important and very convenient, and for the further assessment of the treatment modality and the functional status. It's a good lab prognostically, and how the patient is doing on a therapeutic level. So this is a very good test to assess. Usually the NT-proBNP greater than 399 is mostly taken as one of the loose cutoff point for patients with pulmonary hypertension. Then something is anti-centromere antibodies in scleroderma, as anti-SCL70. Then thrombophilia, those all hematologic, those all checking on for antiphospholipid antibodies, lupus anticoagulant, and these all should be performed, especially from the point of view of chronic thromboembolic pulmonary hypertension. Right heart catheterization is the gold standard of choice for the diagnosis, and this usually we try to perform right heart catheterization as much as possible in as much as patient who we have labeled as pulmonary hypertension, because this have the capacity to assess mean pulmonary artery pressure, pulmonary vascular resistance, pulmonary capillary wedge pressure, and that and it will fulfill all the, it can most comfortably fulfill all the diagnostic criteria for pulmonary artery hypertension. And it also helps certainly in the type of in branding the type of pulmonary hypertension, and depending on the type specific pulmonary hypertension, the kind of medicine to be initiated in different patients, because there are certain medicine which initiated on different types of pulmonary hypertension may lead to adverse effect than the added benefit. So that's why this is a very important and a gold standard for diagnosis. Then high resolution CT is a very powerful test for ILDs, then pulmonary veno-obstructive diseases, and contrast CT angiography of the pulmonary arteries again helpful in especially for surgically accessible chronic thromboembolic pulmonary hypertension. MRI, it has again the cardiac MRI is very important for quantification of the right ventricular functions and left ventricle, even the left ventricular structural and morphological functions. This is again one of the thing which has superseded this cardiac MRI is one of the thing which has immense capacity and immense potential in which leading to diagnosis of pulmonary arterial hypertension. Lung biopsy, especially for the causes of those interstitial lung diseases or any pulmonary abnormality, vasculature abnormalities, we can go for lung biopsy. But it is reserved in a very specific and in a very small spectra of cases, since it's a very invasive thing to do. So this is the algorithm for basically for the investigation of the suspected pulmonary hypertension. You have echocardiogram, which is pulmonary hypertension, and if there is clinical suspicion, then you can do a you can look for the you have a significant left heart disease, then you can definitely put it under a group 2 pulmonary hypertension, and if there is no significant left heart disease, then you can consider a pulmonary function test, then overnight oximetry, sleep polysomnography, that is sleep study, VQ ventilation perfusion scan can be done, then anti-nuclear antibodies, rheumatoid factors, ANCA, these are then HIV serology and liver function test. And if the underlying cause of hypertension is identified, depending on the test and the results, it can be again grouped in different all the different groups, or if it's not identified, then it can consider as idiopathic pulmonary arterial hypertension, which can be confirmed with right heart catheterization. Treatment of PH. Well, I will. There has I've talked so much about the pulmonary hypertension. I understand at your level it is not a very easy thing to understand. So I would the next class I will sum it up with the treatment, and again I will recap whatever I taught you in this class about pulmonary hypertension. And one important thing I want to drive across is all the lectures. This is the last topic for the pulmonology, and then we'll switch over to we'll see whether we'll switch over to the nervous system. What is important that in the subsequent lectures we can conduct an assessment test, something called assessment test. It can be that can be used as one of the marker for internal assessment. So you should be thorough with the topics we have already taken in pulmonology, and the questions which will be posted will be mostly MCQ based questions, and I haven't made any format as such, but it can definitely I can fire in all the MCQs in any of the lectures. So start preparing for all the lectures which I have taken, all ensuing pulmonology, all the starting from pneumonia to COPDs to pulmonary embolism and ILDs and ARDS. So I hope you will be ready with the your preparation, and in subsequent lectures we can have a spot test or a surprise test, surprise internal assessment, and any of the subsequent lecture. Be ready. It will be an mostly an MCQ based question answers. So any question, any queries you have right now, you can ask me. You can fire in your queries. I understand if you have a problem with understanding uh, anything related to pulmonary hypertension, you let me know, and then I can elaborate more on that in the next class, or anything I can touch in this class. You can let me know. Any particular segment you want me to touch, you let me know. So once we'll talk about the treatment modalities in the next class. Uh, uh, Again, the most importantly, the treatment depends on the type of pulmonary hypertension, as I already showed through the slides. So you will also be able to better assess and analyze this topic as we go through the individual treatment and individual classes of. We'll take up the individual classes of pulmonary hypertension once again, uh, invariably the treatment modalities will also help you understand this topic uh, more easily and more substantially. You can go through this topic if you have Davidson or Harrison, and then go through this topic, and it's very much convenient for you, and you can gather your all your questions and fire in your queries in the next class. If you just go through this particular topic from Harrison or Davidson, whatever book you follow, and you let me know in the next class.